And I'm actually only talking for like 20 minutes. So, I mean, it'll be 25 minutes, but I think that's good because we're all tired. We've been here just like paper after paper for 2 days. But really, what I wanted to do was facilitate a conversation. And so I've hopefully looped back around to a few of the papers to kind of make some connection. So I'm going to go ahead and awkwardly share my screen. Oh, wait, if I do it that way, sometimes it doesn't. I'm gonna try, and then you guys tell me if my slides are not showing. How's that? Good? Okay. Everybody good? Great. All right. So even I like had a few lines where I was introducing myself because I didn't know that I'd be getting that really nice introduction. But I'm going to talk a little bit about 28 years later, but I'm also like Stephen, kind of circling back to this conversation that he and I, but the whole team started having in Frankfurt. So if you've seen me talk before recently in the past couple of years, you'll be like, oh yeah, this is SJ beating her same old drum. But I promise there will be some new content. So yeah, so these are the two books that Chera just mentioned. But actually, part of what I wanted to do with this short talk today was basically to kind of make an infomercial about Chera's new book. Corpse Crusaders, The Zombie in American Comics, which I just read this summer. So obviously, I'm not going to cover all of the book, but I am going to pull out one strand that I think is really important for us to keep in mind and kind of tease that a little bit. And that concerns differently embodied zombies. So if you've already seen 28 years later, there are some examples in there that I want to eventually chat about. The first being the slow-low zombies, or I had called them slug zombies, which now has new meaning after Scott's paper. And the second being what I'll call following key strongman zombies, which in the film are dubbed alphas. But more on those examples soon. Um, so as I said, this is kind of my little line here. My issue specifically that I've been complaining about in talks recently is with how we use the appellation zombie. We have seen a lot of flexibility in terms of what gets called a zombie. This isn't by any means a new phenomenon. As Cherokee's book Corpse Crusaders shows, there's been a kind of spectrum along which even beings overtly called a zombie slide, from those with agency and without, speaking or just mutely groaning, cannibals and non-cannibals, decomposing or strong and powerful. And this has been true since the early days of zombie comics. In the conclusion to her new book, after examining temporary zombies like those found in alternate universes outside of the diegetic canon, where recognizable superheroes are zombified, and even fake zombies in comics, Key acknowledges that the zombie has been a slippery category, the word becoming, quote, a free floating signifier, unquote, applied to many types of undead. In the final pages of the monograph, she clarifies her position that, quote, to make a truly meaningful zombie character, one must grapple with the issues of disenfranchisement and othering at the zombie's roots, end quote. That is, as I read Key, the zombie is most important when it does similar work to that seen in the figure's Haitian origins with its connections to race, colonialism, and slavery. I agree with this statement wholeheartedly, though I don't really object to the idea of recuration, which we just heard from Stephen. So recently, I found myself in the position of gatekeeping what counts as a zombie and what doesn't. After the initial flare up of zombie fever in the early 2000s, we started seeing a lot of fast zombies. And then after that moment waned a bit, we were deluged by talking zombies, funny zombies, and people began asking a question that's still really relevant today. Are all of these really zombies? Of course, zombies, like all cultural myths, are going to evolve, but there's got to be a kind of pulse taking. So similarly to Connor Heffernan's presentation, which we watched yesterday, which was calling for more thoughtful use of the zombie metaphor. I think I'm also sort of saying let's be more thoughtful about how we use the term zombie. And similarly to Chelsea Yipko's discussion of inside, I'm wondering about when are things actually zombies or when are they more like a kind of regional undead? Earlier in the book, he says, the zombie is a body that shouldn't be able to live or move, yet it does, end quote. I don't mean to imply that this is her only criteria for what counts as a zombie because she complexifies it throughout the book. But this statement allows me to illustrate a point that liveness in and of itself is far too broad a metric. And at the same time, paradoxically, it's too narrow. So here's what I mean by that. There are many other types of folkloric living dead. I think in particular of the European revenant, a creature that may have limited agency and is often associated with a quest for revenge, which I think is a far more likely antecedent for the revenge from the grave cache of narratives that Key identifies within the broader grouping of zombies in comics. There are many types of undead, and some of which we've encountered over these 2 days, or ambiguously living figures in folk beliefs around the world, like European revenants, fleshly ghosts, ghouls, corpses possessed by spirits, scientifically reanimated cadavers. Surely they aren't all zombies. At the same time, since 2002's 28 Days Later, if not before, we have accepted that some zombies may not even be risen from the dead. And some people's conception of the Haitian zombie may not even be that it authentically died. So if a zombie isn't only a resurrected being, then what is it? In recent talks and forthcoming publications, I've advocated that we need to be more thoughtful about our use of the Z word, especially as we seem to be experiencing a global spread of zombies. We now see zombies coming from places as diverse as Senegal, Israel, India, and Korea, spaces that have their own folkloric traditions with unique living dead figures. Paul Scott has noted that this is true of what he calls the K zombie, Korean iterations. And this is a quote from his piece in the new post-zombie book. Quote, unlike K vampires, which are heavily influenced by Western archetypes, K zombies are rooted in the nation's own ghost story tradition, end quote. For me, the stakes of figuring this out are important because I'd like to assess whether the global spread of the zombie is evidence of an expansion of the usefulness of the zombie's metaphoricity. To quote Stephen Shapiro, whether the zombie can become a magnet touchstone for imagining a post-liberal world, end quote, or whether this broadening of the term is in the service of its mainstreamification, oversaturation, and incorporation in the cultural studies sense that would bleed the figure of its radical potential. This, too, it should be noted, is a concern of Keyes. She wonders if the ending of some of the comics she has examined diffuse the, quote, rebellious potential of the zombie myth. A similar evacuation of the zombie's significance seems to occur when zombiedom becomes, as Key says, a costume for superheroes in the Marvel universe to dress up in. I think the overall overuse of the word zombie is something we ought to be on guard against for this very reason. Stated more plainly, has the zombie just become branding? Are the professors at Netflix slapping the Z word on more and more types of zombies to capitalize upon the zombies' popularity? In a moment, I want to turn to the long-awaited sequel, or I guess third installment in the 28 series, 28 years later, for which Danny Boyle returned to redirect a screenplay authored by Alex Garland. Watching the film in the theater this summer, my teenager asked, as the room began to darken, what exactly makes these zombies? I wanted to say that I had tried to work that out in 2010 with my co-author Karen Embry in an article we wrote called A Zombie Manifesto. Instead, I hurriedly said, it's complicated, not wanting to be shushed by the moviegoers around us. When I offered to share my thoughts on the subject after the film, my kid said, nah, I get it, but I'm not sure she does. So I'm going to share my thoughts with you here instead, because I'm guessing this is a more invested audience, if only a minimally more captive one. Yet it's true that it's a stretch to call the figures we sometimes classify as zombies, zombies. So let's get into some definitions. Perhaps more than others, I connect the zombie to its origins in Haitian folklore, and before that, its African soul capture mythologies about slavery. As I discuss in the Transatlantic Zombie Slavery, Rebellion, and Living Death, the zombie, as opposed to other incarnations of living death or embodied ghosts or fleshly ghouls, was a symbol of appropriation, both in its signification of slavery's life theft and because the myth was itself appropriated in its uptake from Haitian folklore to Hollywood film in the 1930s. This is why lately I've been arguing that the word zombie needs to be used mindfully and that it only describes certain types of undead, not all of them. In my recent work, I have proposed that the word zombie should be reserved for those undead that are either in the direct genealogical line of that which comes to the Americas from Africa, or that keeps to the spirit of the Afro-Caribbean zombie origins by providing a critique of slavery, imperialism, colonialism, capitalism, or even just greed or power hunger. I think that's a really wide lane to provide. As I think all of us here likely accept, the zombie's origins in the slave trade baked into the mythology a critique of the ways that certain people are treated as expendable by others. The zombie as evacuated corpse signified the human that was turned into an object or tool to be used or destroyed without cost. My line is that if something is going to be called a zombie, it should do a similar kind of significatory work. Inversely, I recognize figures that aren't explicitly called zombies, but which do zombie work as zombies. That's confusing, so let me say it another way. For me, the ghouls of Night of the Living Dead fall in the zombies lineage. One reason, I think Stephen gave a really compelling explanation of this, but another reason might be the casting of African American actor Dwayne Jones as Ben, because his death at the end of the film makes a commentary on the devaluation of Black life in the US. In other words, to return to Cherokee's line, for me, Night of the Living Dead passes the key test. The infected of 28 days later, as Karen and I said in a zombie manifesto, evokes the transatlantic slave trade when Jim uses the infected Black soldier chained up in the military-controlled compound as a kind of weapon to facilitate the survivor's escape. Of course, that film makes other comments on capitalism and consumption in the film as well. At its most elemental level, a zombie points to the way humans reduce other humans to objects. Most commonly, this is exhibited when greed prompts humans to oppress others in the pursuit of self-enrichment. This may take the form of a direct reference to slavery or capitalism, but it could just be a narrative about one scientist's quest for power or one corporation's quest for dominance, as when the zombie's condition is brought about by negligence or overreach, as in, for example, Train to Busan. Here's an example I have found useful to use when explaining my point of view. Army of the Dead is a mashup post-apocalyptic pandemic movie with a heist plotline. It follows a group of survivors who seek to break into a vault in Las Vegas before the quarantine zone is nuked. There are different types of zombies in this film: alphas, fast and strong, and regular undead zombies, which are still faster and stronger than old school zombies. But we might ask, are these fast, feral, strong, undead really zombies or some other kind of humanoid monster? There's the intimation that, at least among the alpha and his queen, they love each other and can reproduce, and that may be hard for some fans to square with their expectations of the undead zombie. As some scholars have already begun noting, this film includes prescient social commentary. There are quarantine zones and pandemic imagery, even though the screenplay was written before the pandemic, and this anticipated COVID. There's also commentary on border policing, necropolitics, and the military industrial complex. And I just wanted an opportunity to shout out this really great article by Leah Espinosa Garrido in Apocalyptica. So there's the title right there. As in many zombie films, in Army, the humans tend to be worse than the undead. There's a greedy billionaire who wants the survivors to recuperate the cash in a casino vault, even though it's insured, essentially doubling his money. And he doesn't care how many lives have to be spared for this outcome. The military will pay for the queen zombie's head. They want to use the alphas to make the ultimate weapon. So there's a comment here on both greed and power hunger. So even though these zombies may feel very far from the original folkloric Haitian zombies, which were usually pitiful and weak, one can see the connectivity between the zombie that was a commentary on enslavement and appropriation of human labor, and a film like this one with its super strong, evolving alpha zombies. That trend is not entirely a new phenomenon, but as I've written elsewhere, it can be traced in a lineage backward from I Am Legend, the 2007 version, through its origins in Richard Matheson's 1954 novella of the same name about zombie-like vampires that evolve, and its other cinematic adaptations such as Last Man on Earth and Omega Man. Still, I was surprised to see a nearly identical character of an alpha zombie pop up in 28 years later. And this allows me to again give a shout out to Key's book, wherein she shows that strong zombies were present in comics from very early on, when the figure was more directly connected to its roots in voodoo mythology. The strongmen zombies are pure brawn who use their muscles either for good or evil, depending upon the whims of the master controlling them. In her study of comics, Key connects the racism of early zombie narratives and the eugenicist thread in superhero narratives. Key's attention to strongman zombies would be helpful to anyone looking to trace out the dichotomy between weak and powerful undead. Still, I would add to Key's analysis that the black zombie strongman's imperviousness to pain may be indebted to narratives of the rebels during the Haitian Revolution, who would charge into cannon fire as if they were invulnerable, and which I learned yesterday from Brian Bates's paper was also a feature of Jamaican Obeah, and there were rumors of invulnerable enslaved rebels in Taki's revolt. What's less clear to me is why we are seeing a resurgence of strongmen zombies now in the form of the alpha. So let me take you through a few observations I've made about 28 years later, and then let's have a conversation about its variously embodied zombies, if we decide these are zombies. There are a few different motives prompting my excavation of the film 28 years later. First, it provides an example of a non-American zombie. Here I don't mean non-US, but non-American as in the hemisphere, which I think is important to show, as although the zombie has a historical connection to the Americas via the transatlantic slave trade, it isn't necessarily an American monster. Secondly, the film puts various types of zombie bodies on display, figures that defy what may have come to be accepted parts of the definition, like that most crucially, they're risen from the dead. Thirdly, because it is set in the same universe as the 2002 film, which radically altered the way we conceived of zombies in the new millennium, there may be a sense that this film automatically gets a pass, that it represents the latest iteration in zombie evolution. But it also does something that keeps it squarely in the zombies milieu. It makes frequent references to colonialism and invasion. The setting of the film is located via a title card as the Scottish Highlands, and after the initial setup, which situates our characters in relation to the initial outbreak, which occurred 28 years in the past of the main plot line, we are introduced to a little island community that has insulated itself from what its inhabitants call the mainland. The idyllic little community works like a commune where people take what they need from a storehouse and neighbors share with each other. We aren't given any indication, at least in this first part of the trilogy, that there is currency or even a barter system in place. The children are educated at a schoolhouse and trained to fight, but there don't appear, unlike in the Walking Dead world, for example, to be gendered restrictions on chores or leadership. The leader of the community is called Jenny. Weapons Master Sam also serves as a caregiver, etc. Here we find the main protagonists, Spike, a 12-year-old boy whose father, Jamie, will take him to the mainland for his first time, his first kill of the infected, and Spike's ailing mother, Isla, who motivates the young boy's quest in the second half of the film when he will take her back to the mainland, a very risky proposition, in search of a doctor. Now, I'm going to set aside what Danny Boyle has said in interviews about what his intentions were with the film's messaging, because I don't love his explanation of what's happening in this movie. We can return to that in the Q&A if anyone wants to discuss it further. Instead, I'll just explain what I see as going on and how this fits with the zombies mythos and its references to colonialism and conquest. There are frequent shots of the flag that flies over the survivors' protected community, but it's St. George's Cross, England's flag, as opposed to the Scottish saltire. I looked up how to pronounce that. I don't know if I got it right. A portrait of Queen Elizabeth looks over the banquet hall where the community holds their celebration upon Spike's triumphal return from his inaugural hunt. The survivors' use of bows and arrows to fight the infected is explicitly connected via intercutting to old film footage dramatizing medieval knights defending their homeland. And a detail that has itself inspired news articles is the film's incorporation of Boots, the 1903 poem by Rudyard Kipling, inspired by the author's march across southern Africa in the Second Boer War. Boyle may have intended for us to equate the survivors to the conquering colonials, as the eerie sonic poem recitation plays when Spike and Jamie are marching across the causeway, preparing for battle with the undead, as it were. But the messages get a bit muddled, for we are also reminded that Scotland itself was occupied when Spike and Isla encounter Erik, a Swedish Navy man and the last living member of a marooned quarantine patrol. In a discussion about the alphas, Erik compares them to berserkers, which he then defines as crazy fucking Viking warriors, before claiming himself to have been descended from Vikings. Here we can make a really important connection between the Haitian zombie, a figure of entranced, agentless bodies, metaphorizing the colonized, which is analogous, if not homologous, to the berserker. Here's a definition of the berserker: Scandinavian warriors who were said to have fought in a trance-like fury. So this is actually closer to that other zombie, the zombie I was mentioning from Colin Diane, of the sort of rage-filled, trance-filled, invulnerable zombie. Scotland was, of course, raided and occupied by Vikings from the 8th through the beginnings of the 12th century. Where does that leave us in terms of the film's message? Are the zombies a commentary on the sins of empire? Or is it a perhaps tactless reminder that, hey, if you go far enough back in the annals of history, even white people were the oppressed indigenous at one point? Doubtless, these strongman zombies evoke the conquering Vikings. But it also seems noteworthy that Samson the Alpha, the only named Alpha, is played by one of the few people of color in the cast, former MMA fighter Kai Lewis Perry. Media attention has made much of the nude zombie's prosthetic manhood. The fact that this zombie is reproductively capable is literally on display. But I want to conclude here with a pair to my opening question, which was, are we overusing the word zombie, and is this for the sake of branding / does it diminish the zombie's value? With another question, are we experiencing zombie fatigue? And I think someone actually asked this earlier today. Several of the presentations have touched upon this. From the diversity of zombie types, we've talked about like bloaters, boomers, exploders, to the fact that zombies now seem to sort of shuffle in the background of other stories. We kind of see this trend where it feels like zombies just aren't enough anymore to keep the story going. Is this contributing to mashups like Army of the Dead with its heist plotline, or other zombie films that include martial arts sequences or long car chases? Perhaps our ever-shrinking attention spans are having an inverse reaction on our monsters, causing our zombies to get bigger. In this film, the zombies are big. In addition to the alphas, there's also a pregnant zombie who gives birth on screen, which I could not find a photo of, I'm guessing because I think her breasts are exposed the entire time. So instead, here are some pictures of zombie babies. Uh, Even that is not a new detail, however. Humans give birth to zombies in Zack Snyder's remake of Dawn of the Dead from 2004. The zombie queen dies pregnant in Army of the Dead, and there's a zombie baby in Peter Jackson's Brain Dead, aka Dead Alive. And that's just what I could come with from off the top of my head. Side note, the lone use of the word zombie in the film 28 years later, because it usually prefers the term infected, occurs when Eric explicitly uses the Z word, "It's a fucking zombie baby," end quote. Maybe the only twist here is that the baby is actually not infected. But of course, the zombies come in a new flavor too, the slow-lows. The slow-low are slug-like type zombies that crawl along the ground, though they can walk upright. They slurp worms out of the mud and they squeal like pigs when struck. That Jamie spares a slow-low child early in the film may be foreshadowing about the infected's ability to reproduce. Most often called the fat ones, I'm left wondering if this is evidence of the filmmakers striving to do something new in a zombie film, or if these obese zombies make a new kind of commentary. Note here that Boyle, who is known for his unusual angle choices, uses such tight close-ups on the slow-lows that you're given the sense that they're so enormous they can't even be contained within the frame of the film. I'm trying to find a social commentary here because I believe that the zombie's superpower, hat tip to Key, is in its ability to critique capitalism in its contemporary form as a structure built atop the transatlantic slave trade's appropriation of bodies. But I'm not having great success. I was thinking in yesterday's opening paper about Connor Jackson's discussion of excessive consumption versus the fantasy of reasonable consumption. So maybe there's something going on there that we could talk about in the Q&A. Are the slow-lows meant to represent the poor who don't have access to proper nutrition? Or is this a regressive portrait? I'll be honest that the slow-low just sort of reads as fat-phobic and ableist to me, but I'm happy to be disabused of this notion. Some of the bodies also appear to be persons of color, but I was thinking, but to bring this full circle to Cherokee's discussion, we can return to female zombies in comics, where there's this trope that's seen specifically in iZombie, but also I would add in Santa Clarita Diet, of zombies needing to consume flesh in order to keep themselves from decaying. In those texts following Key, the need to keep the body from decaying parallels social pressures about women's need to prevent themselves from aging. Ironically, among this set, the female zombie consumes in order to stay young, when in real life, diet culture is so often about resisting the consumption of calories. There's a brief acknowledgement of this societal pressure in 28 years later, when Spike is shown a picture of Eric's fiance on his cell phone. Isolated from contemporary society, the boy doesn't know what a cell phone is, what the internet is, and he asks why the young woman, who has clearly had several cosmetic procedures that are in vogue among Gen Z, such as lip injections, quote, looks weird, end quote. Because the film seems in one place to critique beauty standards, I was hoping to find something similar in the slow-low, but so far I haven't been able to figure them out. My point is this: as with the film's visual references to conquest, to the British Empire, to allusions about the Vikings in Scotland, to England's claim to France in the 100 Years' War via this intercutting of archival film footage, the messages around different type of zombies feel muddled to me. I want my zombies, to kind of, tip my hat to Clive Barker and Gwen's presentation. I want my zombies to be radical imaginations of a future beyond capitalism. I want my zombies to remind us of the resistance that is a part of its Haitian origin story, or at least to hold up a mirror to society so that we can be reminded of all that needs to be changed. So for me, it may be too soon to tell if these infected are zombies or not. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. That was awesome. And I am really looking forward to the conversation. I want to hear